Gareth Zeller had been alone on the frontier farm for 3 seasons, ever since the fever took his father, and he had almost convinced himself he preferred it that way until the morning he looked up from mending the fence line and saw an orc woman walking down the road with her belongings tied in a cloth bundle and a worn scarf wrapped carefully around the lower half of her face. She stopped at the edge of his property, her green skin stark against the pale morning sky, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. Even from a distance, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her pointed ears twitched at every sound. Most men would have reached for a weapon. Most men would have shouted or threatened or worse. Gareth Zeller, however, had spent 2 years fighting alongside orc mercenaries in the border wars before his father fell ill, and he knew desperation when he saw it regardless of the color of the skin it wore. He set down his tools and walked toward her, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. As he approached, he could see her eyes more clearly, amber-colored and exhausted, tracking his every step. The scarf concealed her tusks, he realized, an attempt to make herself less threatening, less obviously what she was. The thought made something twist in his chest. "Morning," he called out when he was still 10 paces away, stopping there to give her space. "You look like you have been walking a long time." Her whole body went rigid. For a moment he thought she might bolt, but then she straightened her spine and met his gaze directly. "I am looking for work," she said, her voice rougher than a human woman's but clear and steady. "Field work, harvest, anything. I can work hard. I do not need much." "That right?" Gareth looked back at his property, at the fields that had gone half to seed because there was only so much one man could do alone, at the barn that needed repairs, at the irrigation ditches that had silted up. He should have hired help months ago, but most of the local farmhands had gone to the northern settlements where the pay was better. "When did you last eat?" She blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "Yesterday morning." He nodded once. "Come on up to the house then. We can talk terms after you have had breakfast." "I do not need charity," she said sharply, pride flashing in those amber eyes. "Not offering charity. Offering breakfast and maybe a job if we can come to an agreement. Cannot very well have you passing out in my fields from hunger if I do hire you." He turned and started walking back toward the farmhouse, not looking back to see if she would follow. He heard her footsteps after a moment, careful and quiet on the dirt path. In the kitchen, he pulled out bread and butter, cold roast from the night before, apples from the root cellar. She stood awkwardly near the door, still clutching her bundle, still wearing that scarf. "You can set that down," he said, gesturing to a chair. "And the scarf too if you want. Does not bother me." Her hands went to the fabric at her jaw, hesitating. "Most humans prefer not to see." "Most humans are idiots." He set the food on the table and poured water from the pitcher. "I spent 2 years in the border companies. Had an orc sergeant who saved my life twice. Figure I can handle seeing a pair of tusks over breakfast." Slowly, she unwound the scarf. Her tusks were small, as was common with orc women, barely protruding past her lower lip, but she kept her mouth carefully closed anyway. She sat down like someone who expected the chair to be pulled out from under her at any moment. "Name is Gareth," he said, sitting down across from her. "Gareth Zeller. This was my father's farm before he passed." She took a piece of bread, tore it in half with precise movements. "Jara Murnock. I was cast out from my clan 6 days ago." He wanted to ask why, but sensed that pushing would only make her close up. Instead, he said, "I have 30 acres under cultivation, another 20 in pasture for the sheep. Lost my hired man in spring when he went north. Been trying to manage alone, but harvest is coming and I am drowning. Need someone who can work hard and does not mind that the pay will be modest until I can sell the crops. Room and board included. There is a small cabin out back that the hired man used. Needs cleaning, but it is sound. Jara stared at him like he had just offered her a kingdom. You would hire me. An orc, you said you can work hard, can you? Yes. Then seems simple enough to me. He bit into an apple, watching her over it. Fair warning, though, we are only 3 miles from Bridgeford. Town folk come by sometimes. There will be talk. There is always talk, she said quietly, and something in her voice suggested she knew that truth far too well. They shook on it after breakfast, her hand calloused and strong in his, and Gareth showed her to the cabin. It was a single room with a narrow bed, a small table, a fireplace, and a window that looked out over the eastern fields. Dust covered everything, and there were mouse droppings in the corners, but Jara walked in like it was a palace. I will start today, she said, already setting down her bundle. What needs doing first? Today you rest and get settled. Tomorrow we work. When she looked ready to argue, he held up a hand. You walked for 6 days with almost no food. Push yourself too hard now and you will be useless to me come harvest. Rest today. That is an order from your employer. The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile but close. As you say, boss. He left her to it and went back to his own work, but he found himself glancing toward the cabin more than once, wondering what had happened to drive her from her clan, wondering if he had just made a brilliant decision or a catastrophically stupid one. The next morning, Jara appeared at his door before dawn, already dressed for work in sturdy clothes that had seen better days. Her hair was braided again, and she had tied the scarf around her neck like a neckerchief rather than covering her face. Progress, he supposed. He set her to work clearing the irrigation ditches while he took the sheep to pasture, and when he came back at midday to check on her, he found she had cleared more than he had expected and was working on reinforcing the banks with stones. She worked with an efficiency that spoke of experience, her strong frame suited to the labor. Did field work before? He asked, offering her the water skin. She drank deeply before answering. My clan worked the hill farms in the Greytooth Mountains. I grew up in the fields. She handed back the water skin. Before everything changed, he waited, but she did not elaborate, just returned to her work. Gareth knew better than to pry. They fell into a rhythm over the following weeks. Up before dawn, working until midday, a brief rest in the heat of the afternoon, then back to it until dark. Jara proved to be everything she had claimed, tireless and skilled, and the farm began to look like itself again under their combined efforts. The fields were weeded and watered, the irrigation ditches cleared and mended, the barn roof patched where it had been leaking. They did not talk much at first. Jara was quiet by nature, and Gareth had grown used to solitude. But gradually, in the moments of rest, small pieces of conversation began to emerge. He learned that she was 23, that she had 3 brothers, that her favorite food was blackberry pie though she had not had it in years. She learned that he was 26, that he had once wanted to be a scholar before his father needed him on the farm, that he played the fiddle badly but enthusiastically. The first time she laughed at one of his jokes, a rough bark of sound that she immediately tried to stifle, he felt absurdly pleased. Trouble came, as he had known it would, on a market day in late summer. Gareth had driven the cart into Bridgeford to sell wool and buy supplies, and Jara had stayed behind to work on mending the pasture fence. He returned to find her standing in the yard with a split lip and blood on her knuckles, facing down 3 men from town. Gareth recognized them, Holt the blacksmith's son and 2 of his friends, all young men with more muscle than sense. Holt had a rapidly swelling eye and one of his friends was clutching his ribs. Problem here? Gareth asked mildly, climbing down from the cart. Problem is you got a monster working your land, Holt spat. Got some nerve, Zeller, harboring one of them. Bad enough you went and fought with them, but this is too far." "Monster did not start this," Jara said flatly, not looking at Gareth. "They came looking for trouble. Just wanted to remind it what happens to orcs who get too comfortable around humans," the friend with the bruised ribs said. "Your father would be ashamed, Zeller." Something cold settled in Gareth's gut. "My father taught me to judge people by their actions, not their blood. Now get off my property before I call the sheriff." Sheriff does not care what happens to, but he does care what happens when 3 men trespass and assault my hired worker on my land. That is a crime no matter who the victim is. Now go. They went, but not before Holt shot Jara a look of pure hatred. "You will get what is coming to you, orc. They all do eventually." When they were gone, Gareth turned to Jara. She was standing very still, blood dripping from her split lip onto the dirt. "Let me see," he said. "I am fine, Jara. Let me see." She finally looked at him, and there was something raw in her eyes, something that made his chest ache. "I should leave. I am bringing trouble to you. Trouble found me plenty before you got here. Come on." He gestured toward the house. "Got bandages and salve inside." She followed reluctantly, and he sat her down at the kitchen table, the same place she had sat that first morning. The split in her lip was not deep, but it would bruise. Her knuckles were worse, torn and bleeding. "You got all 3 of them?" he asked as he cleaned her hands, keeping his voice light. "They underestimated me. People usually do." She winced as he dabbed salve on the worst of the scrapes. "You should not have defended me. It will make things harder for you in town." "Let me worry about that." He wrapped her knuckles in clean cloth, tying it off gently. "You did not start it. You have as much right to work here as anyone. That is not how most humans see it. Good thing you are not working for most humans then." He met her eyes, close enough now that he could see the darker flecks of gold in the amber. "You are working for me, and I say you stay." Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the armor she wore. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you care? You could hire anyone. Someone who would not bring you trouble, who the town would not hate you for employing." He could have given her a dozen practical answers, because she was a good worker, because he needed the help, because it was the right thing to do. Instead, he found himself saying, "Because when you laugh, it sounds like you surprise yourself. Because you sing while you work when you think I cannot hear. Because you deserve somewhere safe to be, and if I can give that, why would I not?" The silence that followed stretched long enough that he worried he had said too much, revealed too much. Then Jara reached out and touched his hand, just briefly, her calloused fingers against his. "Thank you," she whispered. After that day, something changed between them. The easy companionship they had built deepened into something more complicated, something that made Gareth catch himself watching her work, admiring the strength in her arms, the determination in her face. He found excuses to work near her, to share water breaks, to walk back to the cabin with her in the evenings. He told himself it was just protectiveness, just making sure she was safe after the incident with Holt. But he knew he was lying. Jara seemed equally unsettled. He caught her looking at him sometimes with an expression he could not quite read, something between longing and fear. She started joining him for supper at the main house instead of eating alone in the cabin, and their conversation stretched longer into the evening. She told him about her clan, about the beauty of the mountain farms, about how she had been cast out for defending a human child from a raiding party, for choosing mercy over clan loyalty. "They said I had gone soft," she said one night as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance over the fields. "That I had forgotten what humans did to our people in the old wars, but I could not let them hurt a child. I could not." "You did the right thing," Gareth said firmly. "It cost me everything. My family will not speak to me. I can never go home." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, Without thinking, he reached over and took her hand. She stiffened for a moment, then her fingers curled around his, holding tight. They sat like that until the stars came out, not speaking, just being together, and Gareth realized with startling clarity that he was falling in love with her. The revelation terrified him. Not because she was an orc, but because he knew how the world would see them, what they would face. But when he looked at her profile in the starlight, at the gentle curve of her jaw and the strength in her shoulders, he could not bring himself to regret it. Harvest came with its usual fury of work. They were in the fields from dawn to well past dusk, cutting wheat and bundling it, hauling it to the barn, storing it away. It was back-breaking labor, but they worked side by side, and sometimes their hands would brush as they reached for the same bundle, and the touch would linger a moment too long. One evening, Jara did not come up for supper. Gareth found her sitting on the steps of the cabin, staring out at nothing. He sat down beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. "What is wrong?" he asked. "Harvest is almost done," she said quietly. "Winter is coming. You will not need as much help. I should start thinking about where to go next." His stomach dropped. "What if I do not want you to go?" She looked at him then, her amber eyes searching his face. "Gareth, you know this cannot work, you and me. People in town already talk. If I stay, it will only get worse. They will make your life miserable. They might do more than just talk. Let them talk. It is not that simple." "Yes, it is." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Jara, I do not care what they think. I care about you. I have not been this happy since before my father died. You make everything better. The work, the loneliness, all of it. When I think about you leaving, I feel like I cannot breathe." Tears welled in her eyes. "You do not know what you are saying. The prejudice, the hatred, it will follow us everywhere. You could have a normal life with a human woman, a family that people would accept. I cannot give you that. I do not want normal. I want you." He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "I love you, Jara. I know it is complicated and difficult and maybe even dangerous, but I love you anyway." "Gareth," she breathed, and then she was kissing him, her tusks pressing gently against his face in a way that was strange and wonderful and perfect. He kissed her back, pouring everything he felt into it, all the longing and hope and determination. When they finally pulled apart, she was crying in earnest now, but she was also smiling. "I love you too," she said. "I have been trying so hard not to, but I do. I love you so much it terrifies me. Then stay. Not as my hired worker, stay as my partner. Help me run this farm. Build a life with me." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "I know it will not be easy, but we can face it together. People will come after us," she warned. "Then we will stand together. Your neighbors will shun you. I will have you. That is enough." She laughed, that same surprised bark of sound that he loved, and kissed him again. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," he admitted, "but I mean every word." They sealed it there on the cabin steps, holding each other as the autumn stars came out above them, making promises that the world would call impossible, but that felt as solid as the earth beneath their feet. The backlash started almost immediately. When word spread through Bridgeford that Gareth Zeller was not just employing an orc but courting her, the town erupted. The shopkeepers refused to sell to him. The sheriff came by to warn him that he could not guarantee protection if anyone decided to take matters into their own hands. Old friends turned their backs when he passed on the street. Jara tried to convince him to send her away to save himself from the consequences, but Gareth refused. Instead, they fortified the farm, fixed the locks, and kept watch at night. Gareth started carrying his father's sword again, the one from his soldier days. The first real attack came on a cold night in early winter. 6 men, their faces covered, tried to burn down the cabin while Jara slept. But Gareth had been keeping watch and he saw them coming. His shout woke Jara, and together they drove the attackers off. Jara's strength and Gareth's sword work proving a formidable combination. When the sheriff came the next morning to investigate, he took one look at the scene and shook his head. "You are making powerful enemies, Zeller. The mayor himself is saying you are a traitor to your own kind." "My own kind is people who are honest and decent," Gareth shot back. "Species does not enter into it. Plenty would disagree with you on that." The sheriff looked at Jara, who stood beside Gareth with her arms crossed. "You could solve this by leaving, go somewhere else, start over." "She is not leaving," Gareth said firmly. "This is her home too now." After the sheriff left, Jara turned to Gareth with worry etched deep in her face. "This will not stop, they will keep coming. Someone will get hurt, maybe killed. Then we need to be smarter than them." Gareth pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We need allies. Who would ally with us? Remember I said I fought in the border companies. Had friends there, both human and orc. Time to call in some favors." Over the next weeks, Gareth sent letters and slowly, responses came back. Two of his old company mates, humans who had fought alongside orcs and respected them, agreed to come help secure the farm. More surprisingly, a small group of outcast orcs, others like Jara who had been expelled from their clans for various reasons, sent word that they would come if needed. By midwinter, Gareth's farm had become something of a haven. The two human veterans arrived first, weathered men named Harold and Thomas, who owed Gareth their lives from the war. They helped fortify the property and kept watch. Then the orcs came, 5 of them, refugees and outcasts who had nowhere else to go. Gareth offered them work and shelter, and they accepted gratefully. The farm transformed. What had been a lonely place where Gareth struggled alone became a community, a little island where humans and orcs worked side by side. They built new cabins for the arrivals. They cleared more land for spring planting. And slowly, grudgingly, the attacks from town lessened. It was harder to terrorize a well-defended property full of trained fighters. Not everyone in Bridgeford stayed hostile. A few of the more open-minded residents began to quietly trade with them again, curious about this strange experiment on the Zeller farm. A merchant named Davies started making regular trips out to buy their wool and sell them supplies, charging fair prices and treating everyone with respect, regardless of species. "You are starting something here," Davies said to Gareth one spring day, 8 months after Jara had first walked down that road. "People are watching, some with anger but some with curiosity. You might be changing minds slowly." "Not trying to start a revolution," Gareth said. "Just trying to live our lives. Sometimes those are the same thing." As spring turned to summer and they prepared the fields for another season, Gareth realized that what they had built was more than he had ever dared hope for. The farm was thriving with so many hands to work it. The community was strong, bound by their shared status as outsiders and their determination to prove that humans and orcs could coexist peacefully. But most importantly, he had Jara. She moved into the main house that spring, and they made it their home together. In the mornings, he would wake to find her sleeping beside him, her green skin beautiful in the early light, her expression peaceful in a way it had never been when she first arrived. They worked together during the day, stealing kisses in the barn, holding hands as they walked the property lines. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch with the others, sharing food and stories and laughter. One evening in late summer, as they celebrated a successful harvest with the whole community gathered around a bonfire, Gareth stood and cleared his throat. The conversation died down, everyone turning to look at him curiously. "I have something to say," he announced, suddenly nervous despite having planned this for weeks. He reached down and pulled Jara to her feet beside him. She looked confused, her ears twitching with uncertainty. Jara Murnock, almost exactly 1 year ago, you walked down that road looking for work, and I grinned like a fool because I knew somehow that you were going to change my life. He took both her hands, aware of everyone watching but caring only about her. You did change it. You made it better in every possible way. You made this farm a home. You made me remember how to be happy. You made me believe that maybe the world could be better than it is. Her eyes were wide, filling with tears. Gareth, what are you doing? He dropped to one knee, pulling out the ring he had commissioned from Davies, a simple silver band with a green stone that matched her skin. I am asking you to marry me. I know we cannot do it in any church and the law probably will not recognize it, but I do not care about any of that. I want to stand in front of our friends here and pledge my life to you. I want everyone to know that you are my partner, my love, my future. Will you marry me? Jara made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Yes, she said, pulling him to his feet and throwing her arms around him. Yes, of course yes, you foolish, wonderful man. The community erupted in cheers. Harold slapped Gareth on the back hard enough to bruise. The other orcs crowded around Jara, chattering excitedly in their language. Thomas pulled out a bottle of wine he had been saving for a special occasion. They held the ceremony a week later, at sunset, in the field where Jara had first started working. Harold officiated, reading words about love and commitment that they had all worked on together. Jara wore a dress that one of the orc women had sewn, deep green to match her skin, with embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Gareth wore his father's best shirt and vest, cleaned and mended with care. When Harold asked them to make their vows, Gareth took Jara's hands and said, I vow to stand with you against anyone who would tear us apart. I vow to love you exactly as you are, tusks and strength and fierce heart. I vow to build a life with you that makes us both happy, no matter what the world thinks. You are my home now, Jara. You always will be. Jara's voice shook as she replied, I vow to trust you, even when fear tells me to run. I vow to build this dream with you, this place where everyone is welcome. I vow to love you with everything I am, for all the days I have. You gave me hope when I had none left, Gareth. You gave me a future. I will spend my life trying to give you that same gift. They kissed as husband and wife while their community cheered. And Gareth thought about that morning a year ago when he had seen a desperate orc woman wrapping a scarf around her tusks to hide what she was. He thought about how he had grinned because he knew, somehow, that his life was about to get interesting. He had been right. But he had underestimated just how much she would come to mean to him, how much they would build together. That winter was harder than the previous one. Snow came early and stayed late, and supplies ran low. But they shared what they had, everyone contributing, everyone working together. On the coldest nights, the whole community would gather in the main house, humans and orcs together, sharing warmth and food and stories. One night, as Gareth and Jara lay in their bed listening to the wind howl outside, she turned to him and said, I want to have a child with you. He looked at her in surprise. They had never discussed it, both aware of the complications such a thing would bring. Are you sure? It would be even harder than what we already face. I know. But I want to bring something good into this world. I want to raise a child who sees humans and orcs as equally worthy, who knows that love matters more than blood. And I want that child to be ours. She put her hand on his chest over his heart. We have built something beautiful here. I want to share it with our family. He covered her hand with his. Then let us make that happen. By spring, Jara was pregnant. The news spread through their community with joy and, Gareth suspected, some concern about what it would mean. But everyone rallied around them, the orc women sharing knowledge about pregnancy and birth, the humans helping to prepare a nursery, everyone determined to support this next chapter. Bridgeford's reaction was more mixed. Some saw it as final proof that Gareth had betrayed his own kind. But others, especially some of the younger people, started to come out to the farm, curious and quietly supportive. A few even asked if there was work available, willing to join the experiment. Gareth and Jara accepted them carefully, making sure they understood what they were signing up for, what prejudice they might face. But by midsummer, they had added 3 more humans and 2 more orcs to their community, and the farm had never been more prosperous. On a warm autumn night, under the same stars where they had first confessed their love, Jara went into labor. It was long and difficult, as births often were, but the orc women who attended her knew what they were doing, and Gareth held her hand through all of it, whispering encouragement and love. When their daughter finally arrived, crying lustily, with green skin like her mother and bright blue eyes like her father, Gareth felt something in his chest crack open with overwhelming love. "She is perfect," Jara breathed, exhausted but glowing. "Look at her, Gareth. She is perfect." "She is," he agreed, kissing his wife's forehead. "Just like her mother." They named her Grace, for the grace that had brought Jara to his door, for the grace that had allowed them to build this impossible life together. And as he held his daughter for the first time, looking at this tiny life that was both human and orc and entirely herself, Gareth thought about the future. It would not be easy. Grace would face prejudice and challenges that no child should have to face. But she would also grow up in a community that loved her, that proved every day that humans and orcs could not just coexist, but thrive together. She would grow up knowing that love was stronger than hatred, that families came in all forms, that the world could be changed by people who were brave enough to try. 2 years after that first morning when Jara had walked down his road, Gareth stood on his porch with his wife beside him and his daughter in his arms, looking out over fields worked by humans and orcs together, and he knew with absolute certainty that he would not change a single moment of it. Jara leaned against his shoulder, watching Grace grab at a butterfly that had landed on the porch rail. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "All the trouble, all the prejudice, all the fights." Gareth turned and kissed her, careful not to jostle Grace, tasting the familiar shape of her lips and feeling her tusks press gently against his face. "Not for a single second," he said. "You are my whole heart, Jara. You and Grace. Everything else is just noise." She smiled, that full, honest smile that she had learned to share freely now that she was safe and loved. "I am glad I wrapped that scarf over my tusks that first day. Glad I was brave enough to ask for work. Glad you were crazy enough to say yes." "Best decision I ever made," he said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. As summer turned to autumn once more, the Zeller farm continued to grow. More outcasts and refugees found their way there, both human and orc, drawn by stories of the place where species did not matter, only character. They added more cabins, cleared more fields, built a larger barn. Davies the merchant started bringing other traders out to see what they had built, and slowly, grudgingly, the attitude in Bridgeford began to shift. It would take generations, Gareth knew, for true acceptance to come. But they had made a start. They had proved it was possible. And every day, as he worked beside his wife and watched his daughter grow, as he saw humans and orcs sharing meals and laughter and life, he felt proud of what they had created. On their second anniversary, Gareth and Jara stood in the same field where they had married, this time with Grace toddling between them, holding both their hands. The whole community had gathered again, but this time not for a wedding. this time for a celebration of everything they had built together. Harold stood up to speak, his weathered face creased in a rare smile. 2 years ago I came here because I owed Gareth my life. I stayed because I found something worth more than life. I found a home. I found proof that the things we fought for in the war, the idea that we could move past old hatreds, was not just a dream. You two started this, Gareth and Jara. You were brave enough to love each other when the world said you should not, and look what grew from that bravery. He gestured around at the gathered crowd, at the humans and orcs standing together, at the children playing without caring about the color of each other's skin. This is what the future looks like, Harold continued. This is what we fought for. And it started because one man saw an orc woman walking down his road, and instead of fear or hatred, he felt joy. He grinned. Everyone turned to look at Gareth, and he felt his face flush with embarrassment and pride. Jara squeezed his hand, and Grace patted his leg with her small green hand. I did grin, Gareth admitted. Though I did not know why at the time. I think maybe some part of me recognized her, recognized the person who would change everything. The person who would teach me what real courage looks like, what real love is. He pulled Jara close, kissing the top of her head. I grinned because my life was about to begin, and somehow I knew it. Jara looked up at him with eyes full of love and tears. And I wrapped a scarf over my tusks because I was afraid. Afraid of being hurt again, afraid of rejection, afraid of hope. But you taught me I did not have to hide. You taught me I was worthy of love exactly as I am. You gave me back myself, Gareth. The celebration lasted into the night, with food and music and dancing. Gareth played his fiddle, badly as always, but Jara danced with grace in her arms, spinning and laughing, and he thought his heart might burst from happiness. As the stars came out and the party began to wind down, Gareth stood at the edge of the crowd, just watching. Watching his wife teach their daughter to dance. Watching humans and orcs sharing drinks and jokes. Watching the life they had built bloom in front of him. Thomas came to stand beside him, following his gaze. You know people are going to write about this someday, the older veteran said. About the farmer who married an orc and started a revolution. Do not care about any of that, Gareth said honestly. I just care about her, about Grace, about making sure everyone here has a safe place to call home. I know, that is why it will matter. Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. You are changing the world, whether you mean to or not, one act of love at a time. Maybe Thomas was right. Maybe they were part of something bigger than themselves. But as Gareth walked over to reclaim his wife and daughter, as he held them both close under the autumn stars, all he cared about was this moment. This perfect, impossible, beautiful moment that he had fought so hard to create. Jara tilted her face up for a kiss, and he obliged happily, tasting joy and hope and the promise of all the tomorrows they would share. Grace giggled between them, and somewhere in the background, someone started a new song. The world beyond their farm was still full of hatred and prejudice. There were still people who would call what they had built an abomination. There would be more fights, more challenges, more dark nights when they wondered if they could keep going. But here now, surrounded by their chosen family in the home they had made together, Gareth Zeller knew they would face whatever came. Because he had found something worth fighting for. He had found Jara, his fierce, beautiful, impossible love. He had found Grace, their bridge between worlds. He had found a community that proved every day that the future could be better than the past. And it had all started with a scarf wrapped over Tusks, with a desperate hope for work and safety, with a man who had looked at someone the world called a monster and seen only a woman who needed help. It had started with a grin, and that grin had become a love story, a family, a revolution. As Gareth carried his sleeping daughter back to the house with Jara's hand warm in his, he looked up at the stars and silently thanked whatever fate had brought her to his door. Then he looked at his wife, at the woman who had transformed his life in ways he could never have imagined, and he grinned again. The same grin he had worn that first morning. The grin that said, "My life is about to get interesting." The grin that said, "I am exactly where I belong." The grin that said, "This is love and it is worth everything."